Hi, I'm Robert Lodder, and I'm going to be talking about a new project we recently began working on, and that is predicting the effects of the Outer Space Treaty on lunar mining through no man's sky. We're doing other studies in simulation and gamification because certain systems cannot really be analyzed or predicted in any other way. And those kinds of systems are systems involving humans, people. If you want to predict what people will do, one of the best ways to do that is to watch them play a game that's similar to what the actual circumstance is going to be. So lunar mining is something you can actually simulate in no man's sky. Our work in gamification actually started with pharmaceutical quality. FDA facility inspections have been dropping for years, and when the pandemic hit, they dropped to zero. In other words, the Food and Drug Administration stopped in March and visiting pharmaceutical plants and inspecting them, both in the US and overseas. So basically, manufacturers can ship whatever they want into the United States and no one will notice. Prior to the pandemic, however, the FDA was using something called the site selection model, a computer model that looks at the compliance history of an establishment, the recalls that have been linked to it, the inherent risk of the drug being manufactured. So like sterile products are riskier than orals. The inspection frequency and history of the establishment, whether it's been inspected by a foreign government, and any other criteria that the FDA thinks are necessary for determining whether something needs to be inspected. We submit that gaming provides a new site selection model parameter to consider. The game we're using is Big Pharma, and Big Pharma actually has in its promo on Steam this paragraph. What if you had it in your power to rid the world of disease, improve the lives of millions, ease suffering and cure the sick, and earn a tidy profit? As head of your own pharmaceutical conglomerate, you have this power resting in your hands. Will you use it for good? And of course, what they don't say is, will you use it for evil? Over here is a video of the plant that Heather set up to produce a drug called acetazolamide, which is available as an oral or as an injectable. We really don't have time to play through the video and see how this stuff is produced. But the important thing to note is that there is a game available that simulates this production process pretty well, not just the production, but also the marketing. And this game, Big Pharma, is actually more constrained than No Man's Sky. There's fewer things that you're allowed to do in Big Pharma than in a wide open game like No Man's Sky. And that actually makes the game easier to analyze and easier to study. Let's go ahead. There are only 3 manufacturers of acetazolamide. Acetazolamide is an important drug. It's on the WHO list of essential medicines. It's used to treat fluid retention, edema, some other diseases. But using Big Pharma, the simulations that we conducted were conducted to estimate potential profit gain for generics manufacturers by underdosing the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the API. And these were run in Big Pharma. The simulations were all run for 1 game year. And we had to do a currency conversion, of course. So when you look at these numbers, don't think that these are actual US dollars, they're game dollars. So in this case, Hikma product, which actually sells to the University of Kentucky Hospital for $36 a vial, is priced in the game at $211 a vial. One of the interesting things about this, though, is if you look at the actual dollars, 1 generic is about half the cost of the other 2 generic drugs. In the game, we varied the amount of API between 80 and 100% to reduce the cost for some manufacturers. The simulations use the same assembly line and basically the same processes, other than the lack of API. And what we found was, surprise, shortchanging patients by underdosing is a good way to make money. These are the 3 manufacturers, XGen, Mylan, and Hikma. This is their profits. You can see the profits of Mylan and Hikma are quite a bit larger, not only because of their double the price, but also because they actually put less drug in. You don't have to put in that much less drug to actually make a great savings and to make it very much more profitable. So this is over here is the XGen profit, and over here, these massive profits over here are the Mylan and Hikma products. Now, you can get away with this because in the United States, generics are all assumed to be equivalent. And so they are purchased only on the basis of price. Hospitals, group purchasing organizations only look at price. It's the only factor that is given to you because the FDA says they are equivalent and nobody tests it to see if that's true. So we decided to test that and see if it was true. And what we found was that there is acetazolamide adulteration in drug products marketed by Hikma. And we typically will look at 6 to 12. We have our own site selection sort of model, a sample selection model at the university, and it tells us how many we should look at from each lot. But in this case, we see they all look pretty much the same, except we found one in one batch where this peak was disappearing and these peaks were appearing. This is a chemical sign of adulteration. Once a hit like this is detected, we activate a protocol. We escalate this for more extensive testing with different methods. But even one hit, when you're looking at a small sample, means that 18 to 70% of the lot could be affected. This principal component plot gives you an idea of how much they're affected. This is the normal Hikma acetazolamide. This is the material that is not processed according to best practices, perhaps would be the easiest way to put it. And then this is the material that's actually adulterated. So we went and looked at additional drugs for Mylan, and we found the same thing happening, albeit at a somewhat lower level. And now you don't see that huge displacement. You see the same sort of trend happening, but the adulterated samples are not as radically different from the good samples. What all this means is that people are taking shortcuts and the process controls aren't what they're supposed to be, and underdosed drugs are getting in to the US drug supply, and they're getting in with extra impurities that they really shouldn't have. I'm not going to show any XGen product because the XGen was all clean. But if you go back to the game and look at this, increasing market share doesn't really increase the profits of XGen. So if we have XGen with a 2% increase in market share because their price is lower, or a 5%, or a 10%, or a 15%, it doesn't really help them. And that's because, first of all, their price is lower. And secondly, because they don't have to spend, they spend a lot more on their drug than Mylan and Hikma do. Even with a 4% increase in demand and a 50% increase in drug price, XGen makes less money than Mylan and Hikma. So there's a tremendous incentive to underdose, to cut corners, and allow impurities to go through. Remdesivir is another example. It's actually an obvious counterfeiting target because of the high cost and the rush to supply patients during COVID-19. It only costs 93 cents to manufacture, but sells for $520 a vial. We were suspicious of it for those kind of reasons, and we pulled some out and analyzed it. 2 of the first 7 batches that came into the state of Kentucky, we tested at the hospital central pharmacy, and they contained adulterated vials, in some cases, very highly adulterated vials. We are still analyzing them, trying to find out what all of the problems are with those. These vials over here in the B group just have moisture levels that are either higher or lower than the good vials. So gamification can be useful, even predictive. It tells you important things. What does that mean for space mining? Well, water is, of course, the most valuable commodity right now on the moon. Much of the water is sequestered in the form of hydrates. They have to be mined. It can also be found in tiny ice grains mixed into the soil, which are located in permanently shattered regions near the poles in craters. So you can sift that water out, the ice crystals out, or you can mine the hydrates and force it out with heat, for example. Now, 16 Psyche is an asteroid that contains about 1% of the mass of the asteroid belt. It's 200 kilometers in diameter, and it's thought to be the exposed core of a metal-rich protoplanet. It's scheduled for space exploration in January 2026 right now by NASA, and it has been estimated that its various metals would be worth a massive $10,000 quadrillion, which dwarfs the gross planetary product, of course. 2 space mining companies have been gearing up for asteroid mining: Deep Space Industries, which was purchased by Bradford Space, and Planetary Resources, which was purchased by Consensus Space. We're both looking at a smaller asteroid, which was considered to be worth up to $5.7 trillion. So what's likely to happen once these companies and other companies all arrive on an asteroid? This is the kind of question we seek to answer through gamification of the problem. The Outer Space Treaty governs things like this. One of the main purposes of the Outer Space Treaty is to bar countries party to the treaty from placing weapons of mass destruction in outer space. But it also talks about other things like rescuing each other's astronauts and sharing resources. In the process of doing this, it introduces an ambiguity in the form of non-interference clauses that call for all the signatories to avoid damaging the other's probes or outposts, for example, by landing near them or on top of them. And while that requirement seems reasonable, it also creates an opportunity for a country or a company to monopolize a relatively small number of lunar craters containing substantial water simply by arriving there first. About a half dozen governments, as well as several private companies, have lunar missions planned in the near future, and this lunar gold rush could be primed for conflict. No Man's Sky is an action-adventure survival game that's available on Steam. It has 4 main foci: exploration, survival, combat, and trading. These are all things that are relevant to the lunar mining problem. Players exist and operate in a space that is generated mathematically and contains 18 quintillion planets. Basically, it's an entire universe. Players advance in the game by mining resources to power and improve their equipment, and by buying and selling resources using credits earned by documenting flora and fauna, which could later, of course, be turned into drugs and sold to people at high prices and adulterated. Anyway, for those reasons, No Man's Sky provides a great forum in which to investigate all the clauses of the Outer Space Treaty. A set of players, when we play this game, are given a planet to explore in No Man's Sky and a copy of the Outer Space Treaty to honor or to violate if they so desire. In that way, we hope to understand the possible outcomes of the space race to the moon. Now, we started this with the idea that we would be doing it in the esports arena that the University of Kentucky is building, but we're still waiting for the esports arena to open. It looks like it'll be available in February 2021. The pandemic slowed the opening and there aren't really any students to participate. Well, all of our classes went online in the spring and the summer. The campus offices have all been closed. We introduced hybrid learning in the fall, but the campus offices stayed unstaffed except for remote workers. January 11th is now being discussed as the reopening date for campus offices, and spring 2021 is scheduled as hybrid learning. So we should be able to get some students on campus unless there's a feeling that they'll all slip to remote learning again. So what have we been able to learn so far playing with just people in my research group and their friends? Well, with only a few players so far, it's hard to draw any real generalizations because something different happens every time we play. And we really don't get that much time to play because remote work is harder in many ways. And we've been kind of used up with the drug project, frankly. But in No Man's Sky, we found that players tend to avoid each other, or at least not seek each other out. And competition for resources far outweighs any cooperation observed in gathering and utilizing the resources. No central authorities have ever developed, but this may only occur when larger numbers are playing. And we found that combat is rare, but theft occurs. Combat is only engaged in for fun by players who wish they were playing a first-person shooter, but are instead playing this. What we really need right now are more players. No Man's Sky is like Minecraft with the Tekkit mods and better graphics. In No Man's Sky, it's actually unusual to run across another player. With 18 quadrillion planets, or quintillion planets, the probability of meeting another is low. We have to force players onto the same planet, and we need larger numbers to force them to bump into each other. Resources are often not particularly limited on these planets, so people don't have to cooperate to use them. And we have to use proxies for resources like water. So we might use carbon instead. With campus mostly closed, recruiting players is a problem. And if you want to help, please click on our call for players on the slide deck or sign up to play. You can also contact me for more information.